If it took 30 years, we would still be here doing this. And we are still here. We are still requesting information for people to come forward. And I looked up the definition of justice. And I think we all feel, that if you know something about my sister's murder and the person who killed her, you have a moral obligation to come forward, because this needs to end for our family, and it needs to end for Lindsay as well.
Lindsay Reimer was 13 years old when she went missing in Hebden Bridge on the evening of Monday the 7th of November 1994. She had left her home on Cambridge Street and had visited the Trades Club on Home Street to see her mum Jerry, who was having a drink with a friend. She collected some money to buy cornflakes at the nearby Spar store on Crown Street. This CCTV footage shows Lindsay in the Spar where she bought the cereal and left at 10:21 p.m. Lindsay was last seen by the town's Memorial Gardens close to this bus stop on New Road at 10:45 p.m. Thinking she had returned home, her family then reported her missing the following morning when she failed to turn up for her paper round. 5 months later, her body was found in the Rochdale Canal, about a mile away from her home, on the 12th of April 1995. Since her disappearance, there have been multiple appeals from Lindsay's family and West Yorkshire Police to try to discover what happened to her. West Yorkshire Police's latest appeal on the 7th of November 2024 marked 30 years since her disappearance.
Lindsay Reimer was a 13-year-old child who lived here in Hebden Bridge with her mum, her dad, her brothers and sisters. She was a bright, inquisitive, independent girl, and on November the 7th, 1994, she did what any 13-year-old girl should be allowed to do. She went to the local shop. She went to the shop, she called via the Trades Club to see her mum. She called into the shop, and then someone brutally murdered her. I left her body here in the canal, hoping that no one in the family would ever know what had happened. There has been an immense police inquiry around it, and we're still no closer to the truth about what happened.
Lindsay's family have taken part in numerous appeals over the last 3 decades in a bid to uncover the truth about what happened to her. This documentary includes extracts from the family's official appeal video following 30 years since her disappearance. Her sisters, Juliet and Kate, have spoken about the tragic loss they suffered and the family's grief and heartache following the murder.
I'm Kate Reimer, and I am Lindsay's older sister.
And I am Juliet Reimer, and I am her younger sister. It's so difficult for these guys to talk about Lindsay because of such a tragedy and the trauma and the trigger that comes up every time, that the protective bubble has pushed who she was aside because the murder takes root. So me and Kate's daughter Jess have been going through all of Lindsay's diaries, her notebooks, her journals, pictures, talking to friends, and she seems to be such a really well-loved friend, a dedicated friend, cheeky and mischievous in high school, passing notes to friends, loved doodling in her sketchbooks and her planners and things.
I was actually away the night that she went missing, so I had a phone call the next morning from Mum. I spoke to both Mum and Dad, one after the other, to say that she had gone missing, and I instantly felt that that was it, that we wouldn't see her again, because it was so unusual for something like this to have happened. She wasn't the sort of person to disappear, to take off, to run away, and obviously that wasn't the case. So it felt really serious, really, really quickly. At the beginning, she went missing, so she was missing for 5 months, and we didn't know what had happened to her. So we all went out searching on hills, in derelict buildings, to try and find traces of her, because we were beside ourselves.
Journalists Sharon Boyle and Virginia Mason have both reported on the unsolved murder of Lindsay Reimer and have interviewed Lindsay's mum, Jerry. They've been reflecting on the investigation and the impact it had on Lindsay's family and the wider community.
I trained on the local Halifax Courier paper. I then worked at the Yorkshire Evening Post, and for the past 31 years I've been a freelance investigative crime reporter and a human interest journalist for the national newspapers.
Well, I was working as a reporter at that time at the Halifax Evening Courier, and of course it was a huge story, really impactful, a very close-knit community really, and I think it just touched everybody, and especially because it was a young girl as well.
It was a shocking case, how this girl could just be abducted and vanish into thin air. My first interview with Jerry, she was in a state of shock, but she's a very erudite woman who put her case as a devastated mum over really powerfully, really powerfully. You could see the angst in her, you could hear it in her voice. And I remember sitting there and feeling really sorry for her and the family, to be honest.
The family were incredibly gracious, you know, they were always welcoming, and I think they just thought maybe we could help with appeals. And then in 2000, I was still at the Courier working as a features writer. Myself and a colleague, Tim Power, were asked by the editor to revisit the case, to bring it back into headline news, really. And so we spent several weeks talking to various members of the family and friends of the family. Over 5 nights, we ran a double-page spread with the interviews and the narrative, and spent a lot of time. I think in the hope that it would kind of press memories again in the community, and it might just bring that person forward who had something interesting or something that could just take the case a bit further on, you know, just lead to Lindsay's killer or killers.
I knew Hebden Bridge. I trained at the Halifax Courier. I think I spent 4 years at the main office in Halifax, but occasionally I'd be sent over to Hebden Bridge. And it was quite, back then it was a bit of a hippie chic town, quite, you know, easygoing, very pretty, and where everyone seemed to know everyone. So the fact that Lindsay went out at 10 o'clock at night to buy cornflakes for next morning's breakfast, it would have been safe. It was almost a village-type atmosphere. I think it put fear into the community, because if it could happen to Lindsay, it could happen to their family.
Jerry was well within her right and had the option to say, no, I don't want to talk to anybody else about it. But I spent many hours with her, and she was so frank. I didn't know Jerry before this happened, so nothing to compare, but people who did said it was almost like a light had gone out within her, which you could totally understand. And we just chatted. We had many cups of tea, sitting in her living room talking about Lindsay.
It was a town living in fear. And then, of course, they all start to look within the community. Is it one of their neighbours, a family member? So there's the fingers of suspicion get pointed, there's gossip.
I remember Jerry saying to me, she would look at people and think, was it you? You know, because lots of people I spoke to, Jerry included, said Lindsay was such a bright, sharp girl, really switched on, very organised, very articulate, very sensible. So they said, everybody said the same thing. She would not have just got into a car with a complete stranger. She just wouldn't have done that. And Jerry maintained that all along. Then that begs the question, did she go off with someone, or did she get into a car when she left the shop? If we're all to believe that she wouldn't have got into a car with a stranger, then it has to be someone she knew. And I think that's what was going through Jerry and Gordon's minds all the time.
And the finger of suspicion was pointed for a while Lindsay's dad. Gordon would appear on local TV or even when I met him, and he seemed to have like a half smile, half smirk on his face, almost as if he existed in his own bubble, in a bit of a daze. So I think people thought, well, he was in the house when she went missing, so he was an obvious suspect. But I do believe the police have cleared him. He's got a strong alibi. But again, not only were the Rymers dealing with their daughter going missing, they're also dealing with tittle-tattle, gossip, and the finger of suspicion. So it must have been really hard for Jerry and Gordon, really hard.
The press conference, with the unfortunate photograph, the shot of Gordon smiling, was heartbreaking, really, because he was that kind of put a whole new a different sense to the case, really. And it was very unfortunate because it was just one of those, just one of those moments, really. And I think people read a lot into that, and that could have sent that in a different direction, really. Because I think it can't be easy for a family who are absolutely in torment and grief to be put in front of cameras anyway and being asked questions. About 6 weeks after Lindsay disappeared, they organised a search, another search, and Jerry said to me she was incredibly nervous. What if no one turns up? What if no one comes? And she said she opened the door and people were queuing to get in, to pick up a map, to take part in this search. And she said, my heart leapt. I was just so touched that all these people still really wanted to help and do something.
The last memory I have of Lindsay, our last encounter, and that was just before I was going away. And she came up to me in the kitchen at Mum's house and we had a big hug and said, I love you to each other. And I gave her a kiss, and that was the last time I saw her. I really hold on to that. There's moments through every single day where her death is in my mind. And I feel it more when I go to sleep. I find myself crying silently. And that's pretty much every night since it happened. Murder is really, really hard for the rest of the family members to then live on and cope with it.
Especially an unsolved one where
there's no resolution.
It's not just like someone dies, you can grieve, and life kind of makes the grief a little bit more manageable. It's something that cycles every year with the number of anniversaries from when she was found, her funeral, when she went missing. Like it's harrowing to live with.
Yeah.
And to watch your family members go through that every year.
Lindsay was found a mile away in the Rochdale Canal, a mile from her home, still in the clothes she wore to go to the spa shop, still sort of tragically with the change from buying the cornflakes, still in her pocket. I mean, that's, I find, quite heartbreaking. She was weighed down by a 20-pound boulder. So that took the case onto another level. A body had been found. A post-mortem revealed she'd been strangled. She hadn't been sexually assaulted. But, of course, then, was she killed because she was going to be? And she's put up a fight. Was she killed because she could identify the person? It brings in all those questions, obvious questions that obviously the police have looked at. Whoever killed her, though, had the confidence, the knowledge that the factory at the side of the canal, which was well lit, but I think there was no security in the night. So whoever committed the crime knew that. They were also confident enough to have the time, the local knowledge, to weigh her down in a manner like that.
I think, like with any case as well, you get these peaks where you think, oh, we're getting somewhere. This is really interesting. This is good. And then, of course, there were incidents like that with this case. There was a car. Someone said they'd seen it was a red, I think it was a red Honda, and that sounded promising. That they seen Lindsay getting into a car, and then there was a report of someone else in the vicinity, and of course, all those things turned out. They were all investigated thoroughly, but they turned out not to get any further forward, not to lead to anything, which for the family must have been harrowing, because you're clutching onto that little bit of hope, aren't you, that this could be it.
When two men were arrested in relation to Lindsay's death, it sent shockwaves, really, through Hebden Bridge, Calderdale, because it's an unsolved killing that is a very, very old crime. I think they were from Bradford. They were released without charge, so we just have to accept that police decision. But I'm sure the police are as frustrated at this and the lack of answers.
You can't help but put yourself in that position. And my daughter at the time was 13. And I just remember, after I'd spent some time chatting to Jerry on one of the occasions after we'd finished, and we made arrangements for me to go back and talk more. And I just remember driving home thinking, I want to get back to my daughter, to my kids, to my daughter, because I couldn't imagine, I just couldn't begin to imagine what she was going through as a mum.
I also did a second interview on an anniversary with Jerry. And you could see all she wanted was to find or to get answers to her daughter's death. That's all she's ever wanted. I've always been very impressed with how Jerry's conducted herself. And I see that Lindsay's two sisters are now taking over. And again, conducting themselves very impressively to get justice for Lindsay and their family.
We will find out what's happened ultimately. And I think that was what was driving people. That was what was driving Jerry to do the leafleting every year around about the time when Lindsay went missing, to go out with the posters, put them in shops. It was impossible to go around Hebden Bridge without seeing Lindsay's face, because there would be a picture of her in most shops and businesses. So there was this determination of a community and a family. We have to keep this alive. We have to keep this in the public eye. Maybe it was just a terrible accident that went wrong. So the person who took her life didn't set out to do that. So yeah, and maybe they are still living with that to this day, and there'll come a time when they have to unburden themselves. Maybe the person who was responsible for Lindsay's death, perhaps they're not alive any longer, who knows? But I just think that there's nothing wrong in keeping it alive, because you've got a family out there who need to know the truth. They want to know the truth, but they need to know the truth. It was a life not lived, it was a life cut short, and so much potential, and you can't help but think, what would have been? What would she have gone on to achieve?
It's my job to help as a journalist, and journalism is the first draft of history, to get information out there, because you just never know. It might prick somebody's conscience. I doubt it pricks the killer's conscience, because I don't think they have one. But it might just get to a family member and think, do you know, that doesn't sit right with me. And I feel for the family, and I'm going to pick up the phone and tell someone. So publicity is vital, it really is. I've covered other unsolved killings, and the families are always really grateful, because you just never know, that one feature, that one news report just might lead to the golden nugget of information. And I think the Rhymers, the police, the community of Hebden Bridge and the wider community deserve it. And Lindsay does.
people's empathy and kindness is incredible in Hebden Bridge. But that's also a really, really difficult thing to live with. And I was 21, I was 20 years old when they found her body. So I was young, and in the press, I was sister of a murdered schoolgirl. And that's a really difficult thing to live with, because that wasn't just who I was. You know, I didn't know who I was, you know. So yeah, I moved as far down the country as I possibly could without leaving the country, so that I could choose when I told people about what had happened to my sister. I moved back to Hebden 5 years ago, and felt able to cope with the history, you know, the history and the murder of my sister.
I've got 2 children now. I have been going to birthday parties recently with my eldest and meeting people who were in Lindsay's year at school with their children at these parties, and it's just absolutely mortifying that could have been a person in my life that was really integral that I've never known. I also have an incredible sister here that has been a rock and an amazing auntie to my kids. I'm just really heartbroken that there was also someone that should have been here that isn't.
Lindsay was actually quite artistic, and made jewellery and friendship bracelets. And Juliet is also autistic. I am not. So I think there would have been a real bonding over that, you know. I think she would have been one of us. She would have been one of us. She is one of us.
We want someone to come forward who knows any information, because you never know. You never know, that tiny piece of information that you know might be the missing piece in the puzzle, and might just fit everything together to find someone and put this to rest, so that there's not this unknown hanging over the whole family. We want answers, we want people to come forward, but there's a missing piece of this that we want people to see. And so we've got a website. We are putting content out with interviews from us at the family to get to know a bit more of the story, the impact on us, the community, her friends, and other people that have been affected.
Do you have suspicions about someone? Were you maybe a prison officer, a probation officer, a teacher who's always wondered, what about that person? Now's the time. 30 years later, now's the time. Secondly, were you in Hebden Bridge at the time? Have you always wondered about coming forward? Loyalties change over 30 years. Now's the time to talk to us. And thirdly, were you involved? Do you have this on your conscience? Maybe you weren't responsible for the murder, but you know exactly what happened. 30 years later, now's the time to talk to us.
Her family have lost out on a daughter, a sister, an auntie, and yet her murderer remains free and has lived a life. And it's not right. It's simply not right. Whoever did it is confident. And that confidence can only have grown over 3 decades because they've got away with it so far.